All right, hello everyone. This is episode 2 of the Unvetica cast, and today we have Nakagimi. Close enough.
LamboshiNakagini, yeah.
All right. Also known as Nolan, he's one of the Reddit ETH Staker, he's one of the ETH Staker Reddit Community moderators. And basically, what we're doing here is the last episode we had Superfizz on here, and we went through EIP 2982, and it really gave us like a full breadth and idea of what to expect for Ethereum 2.0 and all the changes that are kind of coming down the pike. Now, what we really want to do here is sort of break that down a little bit more and analyze exactly what it means from a hardware perspective to software and everything else over the next coming weeks. So with this one, what we want to do is really break down and go over your comprehensive post that you made on Reddit about hardware and sort of the overall infrastructure and preparing for Ethereum 2.0. And really, Ethereum 2.0 meets solo staking. I think that's really what we want to push here. So kind of reaffirming the do's and don'ts for those maybe that aren't familiar with exactly what ETH2 requirements are, and maybe sort of clarifying what a good, better, best kind of situation is for solo staking. So before we get into that, Nolan, why don't we sort of introduce you a little bit more, sort of what got you started with Ethereum and how did you become a moderator?
Well, I got started with Ethereum back in early 2017. I was involved with Bitcoin like pretty early on, like 2012. Unfortunately, I sold a little too early, but that's fine. I never was super excited about Bitcoin. I just thought it was neat and all that. But then once I heard about Ethereum and the possibilities of smart contracts, I was sold. I instantly obsessed with it. So I've just been, for the last few years, just obsessed with Ethereum and just taking in as much information as I can. And obviously, like, the transition to proof of stake is really exciting for me. We're not sucking down electricity. We're not, I can actually get involved with the consensus, whereas mining, it just isn't profitable for me to do that. So it's exciting to be able to actually take part in the network, and I'm just really looking forwards to it.
Absolutely.
So how I became a moderator, Superfizz and I just sort of started chatting and became friends, and we were both equally excited and equally interested in, contributing and coming up with ideas. And so I got invited on to be a moderator from him, and it's been going well ever since.
That's awesome. Yeah, you guys are doing, along with a handful of others, but you guys are doing some really great stuff there. It's been exciting just from a personal perspective, just to onboard. It's such a great community that you guys developed to really not only have a stockpile of really good information, but a very welcoming community where it's not afraid to ask questions, which I think is really important especially with such a new technology.
Yeah, definitely. I've asked my fair share of questions. That's for sure.
So that kind of brings up, segue to our whole discussion here. And one of the posts specifically is you've got a comprehensive sort of guide, if you will, about solo staking and considerations for hardware with solo staking. So there are a lot of questions about this. There's a lot of misinformation, some confusion, and I want to kind of dive into that because it's fun, right? Because I think, at least for me, I always like to think hardware is like anyone who's either in IT or even remotely interested in it. It feels like that's the first starting point for everybody. Everyone works on the hardware, and it kind of stems from there. So I guess let's break that down. So if we're interested in, or anyone for that matter is interested in solo staking, what are the things that we should look out for first, knowing that Ethereum 2 is going to be a phased approach, and that the requirements today don't necessarily mean that they're going to be the same requirements tomorrow?
I guess we got phase 0, then 1, 1.5, 2, and beyond. Who knows? Right now, we have a very good idea what the requirements are for phase 0. For phase 1 and beyond, I mean, we know they're going to be more, probably significantly more, but we don't actually know what they will be. Just more.
So let's unpack that. So we know for phase 0 that I mean, this is the big one in terms of changing consensus algorithms and the actual like staking mechanism. You know, there's a lot of talk on people staking with Raspberry Pis and sort of low powered units. I think that's great, and it's definitely being what is the word I'm looking for? Like,
it's being looked into.
Yeah,
it's being considered.
Yeah, it's definitely not like a long-term solution for staking. Do we want to maybe unpack that a little bit as to why?
Yeah, so staking on a Raspberry Pi right now on the Medasha testnet is possible. Doing it on mainnet theoretically would be possible, but I definitely wouldn't recommend it. I mean, it just doesn't have the CPU power to keep up. And I mean, even the new 8 gigabyte one, 8 gigabytes should be enough memory, but when we start running into like long periods without finality, the clients really start sucking down memory, and 8 gigabytes is going to be cutting it pretty close. And also they start, you know, using more cycles on the CPU. And I wouldn't recommend it at all. Right. And I mean, obviously going forwards to phase 1 and beyond, it's almost certain that it won't work. And then in addition to that, you also have to run an Ethereum 1 node for, I mean, you could use like Infura or something, but now you're counting on Infura to stay up.
Right.
So you don't really want to do that. So running, you know, an ETH2 node and validator client plus an ETH1 node, it's just too much for a Raspberry Pi to be reliable with.
Right. Absolutely. Now there is things to sort of summarize there, especially for phase 0. It's definitely, you know, possible to do it on a Raspberry Pi, but what we're concerned about is the expandability and long term. It's just not going to happen because we're only going to be adding more things. It's only going to need more resources, and especially for Raspberry Pis and like systems, the overhead just isn't there. Now the other thing too is you know, in addition to processing and memory restraints, storage is going to be a big deal, probably sooner than later too. Both in terms of having the right type of storage with an SSD, but then also making sure that we have the right long-term capacity for logging and everything else that is probably going to be coming with, you know, everything after phase 0.
Right.
Would you agree with that?
Yep. So you definitely want probably a terabyte of SSD. 2 really wouldn't hurt, but I mean, ETH1 node right now is about 250 to 300 gigabytes, I think, on a fresh sync. And then the ETH2 node, they're working on weak subjectivity now, which is going to let you sync from, you know, a midpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And the pruning and all of that, the database is only going to get better. So I think it's still somewhat unclear how much space the ETH2 node's going to take up, but it's going to grow, you know, maybe 8 gigabytes a month, maybe a bit less, depending on how the pruning and weak subjectivity thing goes. And then from phase 1 onwards, again, it's going to be more.
Right.
So it's still, I think, a little bit unclear.
Now, is it actually important? Now, there's been a lot of questions in terms of, and I've read a lot of information in terms of like the actual style of hard drive. Now, I think it makes sense. The more capacity is obviously going to be the better in any scenario for any project. But is it really actually important for me as a solo staker to have SSDs instead of typical platter drives?
Yeah, you definitely want an SSD. No spinning disks. An NVMe is fine, but you don't really get any benefit from it. So you don't need to spend the extra money for an NVMe. So that's one of the things that's actually, we'll loop back a bit, and it's exciting about proof of stake is that all your hardware just needs to be good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's no additional benefit for going above and beyond. So if you have an SSD, like a SATA SSD, that's going to work just as well as an NVMe SSD. And you're not going to get any benefit. If you have a really crazy brand new Ryzen CPU, that's not going to give you any additional benefit beyond what a sufficiently, maybe a generation or two old Intel i5. So that's what's exciting about proof of stake to me, because it doesn't really price people out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like an economy of scale. It's just however much ETH that you have is how much say you have in the network.
Absolutely. That's great too. I mean, we're jumping ahead of myself a little bit, but it kind of expands on what you were saying with, in addition to being a more level playing field for people to participate within a proof of stake consensus mechanism, it also is touching on environmental factors. We're not using as much physical hardware to both run it, but also like the power to consume it is also not going to be there when comparing that to a proof of work consensus, which is great.
Exactly. So
now,
yeah,
for in terms of, now just to really hit this home more, comparing platter-based hard drives and SSDs, is that because we need the speed in order to sync properly with the network, right?
Yeah, exactly. The nodes use a lot of read and write operations, and the platter drives just can't keep up.
That makes sense. So if I'm interested then in solo staking, and okay, so we've gone over exactly why Raspberry Pi systems and like systems wouldn't necessarily be the best fit either now or long term. My best option then, if I'm a standard atomic family, is to then run it on the family computer or just something running at home. Would that be the best solution then?
Well, so this is what I've been trying to, this boils back to the Raspberry Pi thing as well, that, hey, it's Raspberry Pi, it's cheap, it's $80, $100 or whatever. It's great, but you're locking up 32 ETH here, at least. A lot of people are locking up more than that. That's like, what's that, like $10,000?
Yeah.
That's a good chunk of change, and you're locking it up for 2 years. If you're confident enough to lock it up for 2 years, you probably think it's going to be worth more after that 2 years. It could be multiples of that. So you should feel comfortable having a little bit of overhead and spending a bit of money now to get a good and reliable setup that you're going to be able to depend on, because again, you're quite literally putting your ETH at stake on this machine. So I guess, yeah, you invest some money now and you'll thank yourself in 2 years or more.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So I'm building a computer and/or buying something fairly decent, off the shelf, and making sure that I'm being considerate of sort of an adequate processor, making sure that we're not scraping the bottom of the barrel, making sure that we're kind of future proofing for RAM, but that's not too bad because that's pretty expandable. Really making sure that we're getting the right hard drive. Again, that's pretty expandable too, not huge there. But I think the biggest thing here is to make sure that expandability, is that you have the options to do that, but then also to make sure that you're able to run this. So the other part of this, we're zoom out a little bit from an infrastructure standpoint, and focus less on the hardware stance. But the takeaway should be here: you need to be prepared to run this 24/7. This isn't something that you turn on when you wake up and turn off when you go to bed. The goal here is 24/7. This thing's got to be available and up and running. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's another thing. I'm not trying to beat on Raspberry Pis here, but like if you get something that's not an ideal setup, it's going to be working really hard, at a high percentage utilization, but it's going to be forever, 24/7 for the next 2 years. So do you trust, that machine to run at full throttle for the next 2 years? I mean, it's too much to ask. So you need to be really careful and really think about having enough power and enough reliability, and it's new enough that you're going to be able to depend on it. That's the most important thing. Dependability.
Absolutely. So let's kind of extend out that scenario a little bit. Let's say I'm a solo staker. I've built a custom computer. It's its own rig. It's staying in the corner. It's away from my personal computer. It's got all the specs that it needs to have. But let's play out a catastrophe. For some reason, either the power supply goes out, or for whatever reason, I can't turn it on anymore. If I'm solo staking, is there a contingency plan there? Are we able to sort of change machines, if you will, from validator to validator?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You're going to have a little bit of downtime, and you need to be careful of how quickly you switch over so you don't get slashed. Although if you can completely change node and validator to a whole nother computer in 6.4 minutes, that's very impressive. So it's probably not a big concern, but yeah, basically you can just copy the keys over to another computer and run on, even your daily driver computer for a week or so, or however it longs to get your other machine fixed, and you'll be good to go. But I mean, obviously you don't want to be doing that constantly, right? You want to avoid that entirely. So in that case, yeah, I would say it's definitely a good idea to have a battery backup, because you don't want to be refiring everything up every time there's a little power flicker, or maybe you trip a breaker using a hair dryer or something, who knows? Yep. So you want to definitely have a battery backup. And if you're using something like an old desktop computer that you have laying around, I know I have a lot of old computers laying around. I feel like you probably do too.
Yep.
That's okay. Consider replacing the power supply. Consider replacing the fans on it. But other than that, I mean, I don't know, CPUs don't really ever break.
Right.
Memory will occasionally go bad, but it's not that serious. I mean, motherboards can kind of go bad, but I mean, if you replace power supply and fans on an old computer, you should be good to go, really. And then again, you always do have the option of flipping over to another computer, right, as a disaster scenario.
It does bring up a good point that you've touched on, and we should probably expand on a little bit more, is redundancy outside of the machine. So with sort of all of cryptocurrency, but specific to 2.0, one of the goals is 24/7 uptime. So if we take even the actual validator out of the equation, we should really make sure, like you were saying, there's power redundancy and there's some sort of, a strong internet connection or redundancy there too. Is there anything else that we should be mindful of in addition to like the actual machine that we're running on?
Well, there is a lot of interesting stuff going on now between secret shared validators and like a testance vouch that lets you connect to multiple different nodes and multiple different locations. That's really exciting, but I would say it's still early days for all that. And perhaps right now at this moment, it wouldn't really be advisable to do it. So my recommendation would be just keep it simple, do as little complexity as possible, just run one node, one validator client. You can keep a backup node and validator client syncing either on a different computer or maybe on AWS or Azure or whatever. But I mean, that's going to cost you $20 to $40 a month. And that's a cost. For me, it's not worth it. I'm going to take the risk and not have that. But people may want, I mean, if you're staking a whole bunch of Ether, it's probably prudent to have a backup node on some VPS service that you can flip over to should you lose internet or power or anything else.
No, it's a good point. And it's definitely something that I think the community at large kind of needs to consider is, in addition to if you want to, stake it all, it's how fundamentally aligned do you want to be with Ethereum and what it represents? Do you want to run a whole farm on AWS where it sort of goes against decentralization, or do you want to have, a couple at home where you're good and everything, how it's working? So I think that's also an important decision that anyone staking needs to make too, in terms of how they're setting it up. I know you touched too on if you want to stake now, one of those requirements does require an ETH1 node. There are a lot of services out there where you can kind of, you don't necessarily have to have a physical ETH1 node box. That does present an interesting problem because now we're relying on one more third-party system. We don't want to, as much as we can, perpetuate a opportunity where we have a situation like the Medasha testnet where Prism was reliant on a third-party service and that went kaput, and so did the network. So all very important things to be aware of and know what those consequences potentially could be the more we scale up and rely on those other services.
Just the different sort of options that I have listed out in my guide, and I'll give you a quick rundown of what I'm thinking on that. So if you're going to use like an old laptop or a desktop, that's all good. Consider replacing the PSU and the fans, and consider getting a power supply with, a platinum or titanium rating. So it's going to be very efficient, and that'll reduce your power bill. For CPU, you're going to want something that's going to be in like the 5,000 or better region on Passmark. So, more is better theoretically, but you don't need to get crazy with it. I mean, if you got up to like the 9,000 Passmark, you're good to go as far as I'm concerned. Don't go out and buy some crazy Ryzen CPU for $1,000. It's not going to do you any good. Focus more on creating something reliable than something fast.
That's a good distinction, where it's not like, I think the takeaway here is we're not building a gaming rig, right?
No.
We don't need this thing to really be a power horse. And I think that's also a confusion too, especially anyone coming from a proof of work consensus, is it's like, I need throw all the power I can at it. And this really does not rely on that at all.
Yeah. It's just got to be fast enough and you're good to go.
Awesome.
So for memory, 8 gigabytes should be good. 16 gigabytes is a lot better. More than 16, I mean, going up to 32, again, nobody's ever said, oh, I wish I didn't have all this memory. Right. Nobody's ever said that, right? So 32 is not excessive, I would say, but 16 should be enough. Mm-hmm. So for storage, again, SSD, NVMe or SATA, either way, doesn't matter. And people should look into setting up like a redundancy there. I mean, that's what I have on mine. I have 2 SATA SSDs in RAID 1. So if one of those fails, I just keep chugging along. I have a server, which I'll talk about later on, with hot swappable drive bays. So if one of those goes bad, I get an email and just pop it in, pop it out, keep running, never even a hiccup. So that's definitely something people should look into there. SSDs do fail. Not super often, but it does happen. So I've seen a lot of people say they want to buy a new laptop for this, which to me just doesn't make any sense. If you buy a laptop, you're paying for, the form factor, you're paying for a screen, a keyboard, a mouse. The built-in battery is nice, I guess. That eliminates the need for a battery backup.
Right.
But overall, you're spending more money than you need to, and laptops are not really designed, with the thermal capacity in that to be running a process 24/7.
Right.
They're, it'll work. I'm not saying it won't work. I'm just saying it's not what a laptop is meant to do. And there's no reason to get a laptop over a desktop. It's going to cost more and it's not going to work any better.
Yep.
So I definitely would not recommend a new laptop. Now, if we're talking about pre-built desktops, again, same as above, 8, 16 gigs, SSD, yada, yada, yada. The pre-built desktops, oftentimes they're going to have bad power supplies or lower quality power supplies. And sometimes you get weird proprietary stuff, like a proprietary motherboard or proprietary memory sometimes, which is very annoying. Proprietary power supplies. So if you have the ability, and you do, putting together a PC is easier than Lego because everything only goes together one way. Definitely look into building a custom machine versus buying a pre-built one, but either is fine. And I guess you get a warranty with the pre-built one, which is okay as well. So, I don't know. Look into it, choose what's right for you. The next is the NUC. So yes. I'm a really big fan of NUCs. I think they're awesome. They're super small, quiet, not terribly expensive. So I've linked one in the guide. It's like the 8th gen, and it's very cool because you can get the taller version, and that's got a slot for an NVMe and a 2.5-inch SATA drive. So what you can do there is buy, say, a 1 terabyte SATA drive or a 1 terabyte NVMe. And then when that runs out of space somewhere down the line, you don't need to replace that. You can just plug in another 2.5-inch SATA drive and boom, there you go. Another 1 or 2 terabytes or maybe even more.
That's great.
So, and then you can just put your ETH1 node on the SATA drive and do your staking on the NVMe. So that's definitely, if you're going to get a NUC, get the tall one for sure. And that's a really great option. They're light on power usage. I'm a big fan of NUCs. And then also a user just sent me some HP mini PC with a AMD CPU, and it was very well priced. So that's also something to look into. I didn't really compare the exact price per performance, but it looked like a really nice machine as well. So it's not just NUCs. There's a whole bunch of different mini PCs out there that you can look into.
Sure.
And they're really good options. So my favorite option is the server.
Right.
The enterprise grade, either rack mount or tower. These are, again, enterprise grade. They are specifically designed to run 24/7, 365 and be super reliable. They're designed to do exactly what we're trying to do. They have redundant power supplies. They have typically a RAID card built in, so you can have redundant storage. They typically have 2 CPUs. So in some cases, if one of your CPUs were to go bad, you can actually just pop it out, restart the machine, and it'll limp to life on one CPU only. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've got the hot swappable drive bays, and you also get a whole bunch of other awesome management features like IPMI, all sorts of different, like on the Dell servers, they have iDRAC. On HP, it's ILO, that let you do things like remote into it and manage it. You can actually, change BIOS settings and configure the whole machine without even touching it, all remotely. So they're a really good option. And the best part is that normally they're very fast and very powerful. And you can also get them for super cheap used. Yeah. Because companies will buy them. They'll spend a huge pile of money on them, like thousands and thousands, $7,000 server. They'll keep it for 3 years. The warranty will run out, and then they'll sell it. And you can pick it up for, pennies on the dollar. Seriously, the server I have was $7,000 brand new. I bought it 3 years old for $300.
Yep.
And it's awesome. It's super powerful, like so many features. Now the caveat to this is the power usage.
Yeah.
These things suck back power. But for all the benefits you get, I would argue it's worth the overhead costs.
Yep. And they usually have, and I can't remember if you said this too, but because they're meant to be run constantly, a lot of the redundancies that we spoke on typically are built into that. So they'll have 2 power supplies, they'll have multiple CPUs, they'll have different banks where if something does go out, it's not like all of a sudden you're leaking funds. You can, you've got a little bit of time to kind of plan accordingly and make sure and correct things. So that's definitely an added benefit there too.
Yep. And I actually have 2 battery backup units, and I got one power supply plugged into each. So if my battery backup dies, I can still keep running.
There you go.
So yeah, it's lots of fun opportunities, and it's definitely the thing that's designed to do what we're trying to do, and you can get them cheap. So yeah, definitely, if you're buying something new today, custom build a computer. That's great. You can put in a RAID card. You're going to have room for that in whatever case you choose. You're going to have room for lots of drives for that RAID setup. If not, the NUC is a great option. If not, the pre-built's a great option. It'll all work well. Server's my personal favorite.
No, I would agree. Same here. I wish I could point the camera at the server stack over here, but it's just. I think once you cross that line and you buy your first server, it's over. Like it's just it's a whole thing. Yep. That's funny. So there's this is all very great information. One of the things I want to touch on is operating systems. So, and we don't have to go huge into it, but there's definitely a pull to make sure that we're running the correct clients when setting up the validators, making sure that we're making a conscious effort to not necessarily always be running Prism or the most popular one, to make sure that we have some sort of fail safe with clients. Is there anything like that with operating systems? Does it matter, or just choose the one I'm most comfortable with?
Use Linux. Everybody just use Linux. I promise you, it's easy.
Yes.
You'll pick up on it so quick. I promise you. It's not that different from Windows. It's not that different from Mac. All the clients are developed for Linux first. And then honestly, just due to the resource constraints, the Windows and Mac support is somewhat paid less attention to. I don't want to say it's an afterthought, because I don't think that's fair, but it's not as closely monitored and taken care of as Linux support.
Mm-hmm.
So Linux is free, it's open source, it's lightweight, it's extremely reliable, it's easy to use, it's for sure the operating system that you should use, and you can use whatever flavor of it that you want. I use Ubuntu myself personally, just because it's one of the more popular ones. It's easy to find support if you need it. You know, Mint or whatever, any flavor you want will work great.
Absolutely. So kind of switching gears back to the hardware again, if you know, we've gone over sort of the good, better, best scenarios, starting with the Raspberry Pi, working our way all the way up to enterprise grade solutions. I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to advocate for it, but I think we should touch on a little bit, and that is like VPSs and services that allow for like a AWS. If I am going to make the decision to use an AWS or AWS-like system, is there anything that we should be aware of so that we're not setting ourselves up for any type of failure?
I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with running on AWS. I mean, you should be aware that, say, you know, Amazon has a big outage. Everybody that's running their node on that Amazon server farm is going to be down simultaneously. And when a lot of people are down, the inactivity leak increases and you get a bigger penalty for being down.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to keep in mind. But as far as decentralization in that goes, I think it's extremely unlikely that Amazon, you know, hacks into a bunch of people's different nodes and starts trying to 51 or, you know, attack the network. I think that's extremely unlikely. So I don't think there's a huge issue with, you know, as far as decentralization goes with running on Amazon or Azure or DigitalOcean or whatever. I mean, obviously it's not ideal, but I think that it's more important that somebody has a dependable and reliable setup than that. So maybe if you live somewhere that's, you know, doesn't have the best power grid, has spotty internet, you know, maybe you're prone to hurricanes and floods and all that, it could be, well, definitely would be a better decision to run on a virtual private server.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, like something like an Amazon EC2 instance, 4 gigabytes of memory, you're looking at $20 a month. I think 8 gigs is about $40 a month. Obviously that's going to be much more expensive than running your own hardware.
Right.
You know, you spend 600 on a NUC, it'll pay for itself pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Versus just continually paying $40 a month to Amazon. And I mean, I don't know, you got to be staking a pretty good amount of ETH before, you know, $40 a month isn't taking, you know, some percentage of your profit, right? Mm-hmm. So that's something to be aware of, that, yeah, staking on a VPS is going to be less profitable, slightly more risky, and not ideal as far as decentralization goes.
Right.
But I wouldn't recommend people don't do it. I mean, I think it's more or less fine. You just need to look at your situation and decide if that's actually what's best.
Absolutely. It does sort of segue a little, and I just want to touch on it because it's getting slightly out of the purview of this talk, but that also brings up a good point about, what about staking as a services where, you know, I may not want to even mess around with VPSs or the hardware altogether, but I've got 32 Ether or more, or maybe I don't even have 32 Ether. Maybe I've got, you know, 20 and that's all I want to put in, but I'm still interested in participating in ETH 2.0. There are a limited pool of services now that offer this, but what is something that I should be aware of or just know the risks involved by soliciting a service like that?
Well, I mean, as we always say, not your keys, not your crypto, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, you need to look at the company and evaluate, okay, are they competent? Have they demonstrated that they're experts and they know exactly what they're doing and they're going to be able to stake effectively and reliably for years to come? Is this company going to be around years to come from now? And also, how much are they charging you for the privilege?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, I think a lot of them are falling in around 15%, 10%, 20%. That's pretty big amount, really.
Yep.
That's a good chunk of change.
Yeah. So I think to really put a period on that, I think it's there are options available to those that are interested in exploring them, but just know that you are completely releasing your responsibility of them. You no longer really own those things the second you give them up. You're giving that responsibility to the company in hopes that they know exactly what they're doing and what we've sort of talked about here.
Yeah, exactly. So you got to do your due diligence and make sure, has this company demonstrated themselves as experts in the field? Because that's what you want. So you take a look at like a Testant. They've done a really good job. They've created a lot of open source software for all of us to use. It's clear that they are experts. So that would be a positive for them. Or you can look at some of the other staking companies. They currently stake for other coins, and they have been. There's some that are being run by, long-standing mining pools, and then there's some companies that are totally brand new.
Right.
So you gotta really do your research on that, because you absolutely are sending 10 or whatever, any amount of money just out into the world, into their hands, and you have no control anymore.
Absolutely. And I touched on this with Superfizz in the last episode, and I think this is a good opportunity to hammer it here too, where I think it needs to be said again. If you're interested in staking and you do stake, this isn't a get rich quick thing. And this shouldn't be looked at it that way. You're probably not going to. It's meant for pushing and maturing Ethereum forward and securing the network. This isn't an alternative to mining like Bitcoin. It's not like you're gonna put a bunch in and hopefully get a ton more out. So I think that's definitely something I'm going to be hammering to with, because it's a fundamental difference in a line of fundamental differences when comparing this to everything that has been currently.
Yeah, the change in the price of Ether will far outweigh any gains that you may see from proof of stake. I mean, the rewards from proof of stake are, if we're doing well, it'll be 10% per year.
Yep, absolutely.
And it will likely decrease from there. So it's definitely not a get rich quick. It's just a way to productively use your Ether.
Yep.
So it's not just sitting.
Absolutely. Well, this is great. This is a lot of information. I think we've got a good depth of information going through what is good, what is bad, what to be aware of, what to be cautious of when not personally staking and using different services. Is there anything else that we should touch on at all, or that you think that you want to let anyone know?
Use Linux. Keep it simple. Don't try to, build in all these crazy, node redundancies, running two nodes, splitting half your ETH onto one node and half your ETH onto another node, and just keep it simple. Don't overthink it. Buy some good hardware. Take care of it.
Love it. Love it. Sound advice. Sound advice. Well, thank you very much for the time today, Nolan. I'm speaking only for myself, but I know that all of us appreciate the work that you've put in and the information that you've compiled for us all to use. So we'll, I think the best thing we can do is just take this and run with it and get ready for ETH 2.0. So
thank you. This was fun.
Thank you very much.